Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD bodybuilder, back with another video. Today I'm going to be giving you a biceps training guide. We're going to be talking all about how to build biceps. Everyone knows that it's important to do curls for the girls or biceps for the guys. And today we're going to be talking about the optimal way to train your biceps for hypertrophy. Quick outline for today. We're going to start off by talking about the anatomy of the biceps using this diagram that I just drew. After that, we'll talk about exercise selection, then we'll move on to volume, or how many sets you should be doing, frequency, and rep ranges. If you've been enjoying my channel, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Let's get on to the anatomy. Knowing your anatomy is key for bodybuilding. And here we're gonna start off with this diagram where in blue, you've got bones. So up here, we've got the scapula, then there's the humerus, which is your upper arm bone, and then you've got these two bones down here, which are your ulna and your radius. If you were to look at my arm, there are gonna be two bones running here. The radius is the one closer to your thumb if your arm is like this. Now, when we're talking about the biceps, there are four main muscles we wanna be considering. First of all, we've got the biceps brachii. And with the biceps brachii, there are two heads, the long head and the short head, which you've probably heard of. Now, the long head attaches on the scapula here at the top of the shoulder joint. And this is really important to understand that it crosses the shoulder. Then it comes down and it attaches on the radius. And then we've got the short head, which also starts from the scapula. Then it comes and joins the long head and they both attach together. From this anatomy, we can figure out that the biceps brachii will flex the arm, which means going from here to here. Now, in the way that it attaches on the radius, the biceps will also supinate the arm. So, supination is this movement, where you're moving towards the palm up position. Since the biceps crosses the shoulder joint, it's also a weak shoulder flexor, which means going from here to here. Now, underneath the biceps brachii, which I've outlined with dotted lines, you've got the brachialis, which is another muscle that starts off on the humerus and attaches on the ulna. This muscle flexes your arm as well. Lastly, we've got the brachioradialis, which is this muscle here, which starts off at the bottom of your humerus and ends up at the end of your radius. The brachioradialis is basically this muscle here. It also works to flex the arm, and it's strongest when your hand is in a neutral position, like this. Now, let's talk about exercise selection for the biceps. First of all, you are going to get quite a bit of bicep stimulation from your pulling movements, and this will include chin-ups, pull-downs, and all types of rows. There's actually research that shows that we get pretty similar activation of the biceps during a pulling movement as compared to an isolation movement like a curl. So if you're really short on time, you should be focusing on compound pulling movements. That being said, if you want optimal hypertrophy for your biceps, you're going to want to include some curls. Now, using our knowledge of anatomy, the biceps brachii is strongest in the supinated position, so I suggest doing the majority of your curls supinated. Next, in terms of barbells versus dumbbells versus machines and cables, I'm normally a big supporter of free weights, but when it comes to biceps, I think that there's not much difference between free weights versus machines. However, you're going to want to include a variety of these in order to get specific benefits that we'll touch on now. Okay, let's go over some common types of curls and their specific benefits. Starting off with your barbell and dumbbell curls. These are going to be staples in your workouts, and a big benefit of free weights is the potential for overload. With a barbell, you're using both your hands so you can lift more weight, and with the dumbbells, you get that isolation of both arms. If you get wrist pain doing barbell curls, then I'd recommend trying the easy curl bar. You can do these curls seated or standing, it doesn't really matter, but if you find yourself cheating a lot when you do them standing, you might want to try them seated. Next, you're always going to want to include some type of stretch movement in your program in order to get stretch-mediated hypertrophy. That is, we think there's an added benefit for including a stretch type movement in your training. So having the arm behind your body will actually stretch the biceps more. Now you can easily accomplish this with dumbbells doing an incline curl. Now there is a more extreme version of this called the lying curl, where you actually lie flat on the bench. This will give you an even bigger stretch in your biceps. I'd recommend you try it. And lastly, we've got the Bayesian curl, which is one where you stand in front of a cable stack and have your arm behind your body in order to get that stretch and take advantage of the cable giving you tension at the bottom of the movement. One disadvantage of the barbell and dumbbell curl is that you lose tension on the biceps at the bottom of the movement. If you look at how the weight is moving against gravity, at the beginning of the movement, you're not actually fighting gravity as much as when you're at 90 degrees. So the hardest part of the curl is at 90 degrees. But that means you lose out a little bit of tension in the first part of the movement. And that's also where you get a benefit from machine and cable curls. Since the tension curve is constant throughout the movement for these, you'll give yourself some good end range tension and take advantage of the full range of motion of the biceps. This isn't necessarily to say that one type of curl is better than the other. The idea is that you just want to have exercises that stress the muscle in its different ranges of motion to make sure that you cover it all. Now, I also typically recommend that people try to include some type of hammer curl or neutral grip curl in their program. And this is because you get the brachioradialis more. The brachioradialis is actually key for making your forearms look big. So I think it's an important muscle to consider. Now, with your pulling movements, note that if you use a supinated grip on, say, rows or pull downs, you will get more biceps activation. So this is something you might want to do if biceps are a big priority for you and you want more volume. Okay, a couple more curls tips. We said that the incline curl focuses on long head since your arm is behind your body. But you can also do curls where your arm is in front of your body or flexed. And this will include preacher curls or spider curls. The idea is that you're shortening the long head so that you put more emphasis on the short head. This could be something to include if you want to emphasize the short head. However, I put an asterisk here because I think this should be the minority of your program. If you had to choose one or the other, an incline type curl is going to be better for overall growth because of the stretch. Lastly, I would recommend avoiding cheat curls. The idea behind cheat curls is that you use body momentum to get the weight up and control the eccentric. This can be okay if you're really careful about your technique, but what ends up happening is people end up getting sloppy with their form over time, and it's really hard to accurately progressively overload. Okay, let's move on to talk about some training variables for the biceps. In terms of volume or the number of sets to do per week, I'd recommend that you shoot for around moderate volume for the biceps. You'll have to experiment to find the exact optimal volume because when you look at gains versus the number of sets, there is an inverted U-shaped curve. So there's an optimal point that's different for everyone, but your bicep volume will probably be moderate compared to your other muscle groups. Now, a common question I get asked is how to count pulling movements for biceps volume. As I said before, you do get a high stimulation in your biceps from pulling movements. This is largely just up to your personal convention. If you look at my programs out on YouTube, I don't actually count pulling movements for my bicep volume. And this is just out of convention. Some people will count pulling movements for a full bicep set. I personally think that you're probably getting around half a set of bicep volume from your pulling movements, partly because you aren't getting a full range of motion in the biceps there, and the biceps usually aren't the limiting factor. I personally think it's easier to count your volume in terms of just direct bicep work, but that's assuming that you get the proportion of your back and bicep work correct. Basically, just remember that if you add in a lot of pulling movements, you will be increasing your bicep volume. Now, in terms of frequency or how often you hit the biceps each week, I recommend that people shoot for around 3 to 6 times per week. The biceps often handle higher frequencies pretty well. However, note here that when I talk about this higher frequency, I'm including back training. For example, if you look at my modified 4-day upper-lower split, you'll see that I like to move biceps onto lower body days and split up my side delts over the 4 days. This actually gives us a 4 times per week frequency for the biceps because you're training them with your back movements on upper body day and training them directly on your lower body days. I actually recommend doing this when you can because it allows you to train your biceps when they're fresh. The biceps usually come at the end of your upper body workouts and they'll often get fatigued after pulling movements. So if you're able to train them when you're fresh, you'll be able to perform more productive volume on your direct bicep work. This will apply to other splits as well, like push-pull legs. Okay, lastly, let's touch on intensity and rep ranges. Intensity being how heavy you're lifting. The biceps are pretty intermediate in their fiber type, so I'd recommend including a variation of rep ranges across the 6 to 20 rep range. However, I would recommend that the majority or about 2/3 of your volume fall into the 6 to 12 rep range. Now, in terms of some examples of rep ranges, you'll have to figure this out for yourself, but just from the way I like to program, I like using the 6 to 10 and 8 to 12 rep ranges more so for free weight curls. Typically free weights involve more stabilization and might be a little bit more taxing, so these typically work well for your heavier weights. And you'll usually want to do these movements at the beginning of your workout. Then we've got the 10 to 15 and 12 to 20 rep ranges, which I like more for machine and cable curls. However, there's really not that much difference when we're talking about curls here, so free weight curls would do fine in the higher rep ranges as well. So to summarize, for exercise selection for biceps, you'll want to have the majority of your work doing supinated curls. You'll always want to include one stretch type movement in your program. Now, at some point, you'll want to have some type of machine and cable curl, and you'll also want to try to include some type of neutral grip curl. Besides your stretch movement, you don't necessarily need to have all of those other types of curls in your program always, but you should be cycling them in and out for variation. Recapping the other training variables, you want to have moderate volume for your biceps, train them 3 to 6 times per week, including indirect training, and aim for a spectrum of rep ranges. You'll want about 2/3 of your volume landing in the 6 to 12 rep range. And with that, I hope you guys all build some massive guns. In particular, what's your favorite bicep exercise? let me know. If you want to see my other muscle group training guides, check out this playlist where I go into depth on each muscle group to give you the best science-based advice on how to train for hypertrophy. If you're getting value from my content, make sure you subscribe and share this video with your fitness friends so they can benefit from it too. See you at the gun show.